Welcome to the Week 4 video on using Microsoft PowerPoint, preparation for the MO300 exam preparation. This week we'll discuss how to apply slide transitions, animations, and then we'll do a review of how to add narrations to your slides. And then finally, we will talk about the different file types and the save as functionality within PowerPoint. And the reason why it is important to go over these items is that there is the right way and the wrong way to utilize transitions and especially animations. So please do not overuse them. Make sure any transitions and animations you use are fitting for the presentation that you are giving. So the first thing we're going to discuss is slide transitions. Transitions are the animations and sometimes the audio that plays when you go from slide to slide. This adds a little flavor to your presentation. Because we will be demonstrating the transitions, and I already have narrations set up on this particular slideshow that I used to create this series, I'm going to open a second presentation that I used as an outline for this presentation series. So in this particular case, we already have the transitions ribbon already open. We have the preview button that is currently grayed out because we do not have a transition set at this time. And here we have a multitude of transitions to choose from. However, if you click on this little more button, you see these are the other ones that you have options with to work with. So you have the subtle, you have exciting, and then you have dynamic content. And we'll go and show some of these as an example. But when you have this selected, if they have options, you can also select it. And then you can select the sound that plays when you go from slide to slide, along with the duration of how long that transition takes. And you also have the option to apply to all of the slides if you wish. Here you have two options. You can either allow a mouse click or pressing of the keyboard left and right to go from one slide to the next, or you have it where it'll automatically transition from slide to slide. If both of these are checked, they will both be an option. If you have it timed, but no mouse click selected, it'll completely ignore any mouse click and keyboard movement to go from next to or previous slide. So in this particular case, we want to go ahead and leave the mouse click turned on. So as we can see, we have a few different options. Fade is the one that I commonly use when I do not have narrations, but I'll explain why I don't have narrations on my slide deck, which I'll explain later. But in this particular case, we can go ahead, select fade, apply to all. It's going to take 0.7 seconds to go from one slide to the next when we show with pressing F5. As we go from slide to slide, it'll actually fade in and out whether you go backwards or forwards. Now, if you decide to go to a cut and then go and apply all and play this again, it'll actually cut quickly from slide to slide. And it does so very quickly. Then you have some dynamic types that will make adjustments, as you can see there as a quick preview. And if you do apply all, and then press F5, it'll do that animation with every single slide. Now, you can also have it where the animation is dependent upon each slide where it is not the same, but that is your choice. But again, make sure you pick the transition that fits your particular presentation. Now, there are some other interesting ones which have dynamic content, which I'll explain with Orbit, and I'll apply it to all. Dynamic content analyzes the slide, and if there are elements that do not change, that particular element stays on the slide. So if we start from the beginning and start to play, you'll notice that the border did not move because it does not change from slide to slide. So now as I transition from one slide to the next, you'll notice that the lines on the left side of the screen do not move. This allows more dynamic flexibility and adjustments to how you show the transitions. Now, when it comes to this duration, as we talked about, this adjusts how long it takes to go from slide to slide. The key thing to note is that it is in a number and a point. This is in seconds and this is in a millisecond, so that's important to know. So if you have, by some chance, done it this way, this will take 59 seconds. So you have to make sure that you're very careful that and how you play with the durations and the capability. So now when we watch this, it'll actually transition slower to go from one to the next. But please note that the transition speed of 5 seconds will stay the same no matter if you're transitioning to or from, as it pays attention to the slide transition time of the specific. So if you have one slide faster than the other, like if the first slide is 3 seconds and then the second slide is 5 seconds, when you transition from slide 1 to 2, it'll be 5 seconds. But if you go from 2 to 1, it'll be 3 seconds. And now on to animations. Animations is when you make objects move on the presentation. And when I refer to objects, I'm talking about the text, charts, graphics, any object on the screen. Now, the phrase, with great power comes great responsibility, is not meant to be taken lightly or as a joke, but it is an unfortunate truth. Because animations is one of the functions within PowerPoint that is commonly misused. It is important that when you use animations, it is used with the responsibility, but also to make sure you do not detract from the point of the PowerPoint presentation itself. Now, we're going to go ahead and go back to the PowerPoint slide that I was working with earlier. And in here on the first slide, you may decide to add some animations to the first slide other than the transition to the first slide. So in order to do so, you go to the animations ribbon. And here we see that this ribbon is fairly similar to the transitions and how it is designed and set up, where you have the option to preview. You have the different animation options. You also have the effect options that applies only to certain types of animations, which will change dependent upon that type. Then you have the add animation, which if you don't want to select here, you have that option also. And then you have the animation pane. Now, when you're working with animations, usually it is easier and a good idea to have this open, so it is easier to work with them. Then you have the trigger of what starts it, the animation painter, which is more of an advanced function. And then you can start to make adjustments or reorder. So first, we'll go ahead and have it where using Microsoft PowerPoint automatically is on the screen. So we don't want to have animations to it. We want to go ahead and animate this by having this fade in. We want to go ahead and have this particular line wipe in. And then we want to have this picture grow and turn as it enters onto the screen. So now, as we see here on the right-hand side, those 3 animations have been added. Now, next to all 3 of them, you have the little mouse icon. The reason for this is these will progress as you click on the PowerPoint slide. So if we simply go ahead and press F5 and start the presentation now, it'll start with the standard transition of how the slide enters. But nothing else appears until you right-click and go to Next to actually start to bring in the different options. Now, once all of the options are there, when you press Next again, it'll then transition over to the next slide. So that may or may not be the functions that you want to work with. So if there's one that you don't want to have on here, you can go ahead and click on that particular object. Come over here, you can right-click remove, or you can also press the delete key to remove those. So now we're left for the ones on the bottom. Now, as mentioned, some of these have different effect options. So from here, you have the capability to change what direction that the wipe enters in. You can enter as one single object all at once or by paragraph. And this really depends upon if you have a paragraph setting in this particular text box, which we'll explore more on on some of the other slides. But when it comes to like grow and turn, unfortunately, this one does not have an effect option. But if we try to go over to the wheel option and change this wheel, you actually have the capability of changing how many spokes in this particular case, of how it enters in. Now, you can go ahead and play with any and all of these as you wish. Now, these are just the simple ones. Now, if you come over here to this little button, you can see that there's multiple types. You have the entrance types, you have the emphasis types, and then you also have the exit type of how it will exit from the screen. One thing to note is you can only select one animation at a time for the entire object. If there's more that you would like to look at, you can go ahead and click on these. So for more entrance effects, it'll actually show all of them that may it shows all of them that may not be necessarily seen. So there is a tremendous amount of flexibility here. Now, as mentioned, you have in here, these lines right here are considered paragraphs. So as we highlight the entire item, you can go ahead and click on fade and see what options we have to this fade. In this particular case, it is by paragraph. Then you have all at once, and then you have as one object. This all depends upon what type of object it is, because other thing that you can do is you can also highlight multiple objects and then have the effects played in. So if you just want to have as one object, that's where we see the differences in here when it comes to these options. Now, another thing to go back to look at is, as we can see here, we have these two objects here with the mouse button, so it's a click. If you right click on them, you can have it where it starts with the previous or starts after the previous. So depending upon what you select, you have different options where if it's automatic. Now, if it is the very first line, if you start with the previous, it'll start automatically at the beginning of that slide. As we talked about, we have the effect options, which is the same as what's over here. The timing has a few different options. So in this particular case, as we mentioned, it's on click with previous or after previous. You can change the delay of once you click, do you want to wait a few seconds before it starts? And then what is the duration of that? Now, these are the options, but you can actually make the duration anything you want. But then you also have the repeat function of how many times do you want the animation to occur. You can either use these options or you can select any number you would like. Now, you also have some loop functions where until you click on the next option or until the end of the slide where it'll continue that animation. So an example of until the next slide is if we go ahead and press cancel, we're going to go ahead and highlight both of these similar to what we had before and select that pulse function where you can see how that pulsed. But with that, you have the capability of, when we go into timing, we can go ahead and repeat that until the end of the slide. So now if we press F5, once the slide comes in and finishes, then the transition will actually start. And then it'll pulse and continue to pulse until you go to the next slide. Now, the other functions that you have the capability of adjusting is the ability to also have the effect options, which is over here, where you can animate it all at once, by word, or also by letter. This has a tendency to be, you want to be careful with this, especially if there's a lot of text. Because if you come over here and press Shift F5 to only play this particular slide, you have to be very careful with how the information comes in, because it can sort of be slow is the easiest way to put that. So you have to be very careful how you work with the animations, how you add this in. And you also have the capability of changing the order over here. So as we said before, there's a tremendous amount of flexibility here. And again, with great power comes great responsibility. And now I wanted to do a quick review on the narrations. The narrations are useful when the slides are being presented when no presenter is present, or in a case if the presenter who is there may not be fully aware of the information and want to let the narration do the speaking for him. The importance of this is that when you add the visual slides to form of audio to go along with them, this allows for enhanced information perception by the person who is watching the slides. There's been countless times where I have been given a slide deck of a quote unquote training and told, look at these 60 slides, make sure you know the information, take the test at the end. And quite frankly, I don't remember anything on those slides because I don't have that enhanced information reception when it comes to that material. So narrations are very important when warranted. Now, there's two places where you can add the narrations, and you'll see we'll also talk about how they impact the transitions. So the two places that you can add is if you go to slideshow, you have the record slideshow button here, or if you have the recording ribbon shown, you also have the record slideshow button here. Both of them are the same. So if there is a slide or multiple slides that you wish to include the narrations, you go ahead and just click on record slideshow. When you're ready, you go ahead and hit record. And then you go ahead and speak the part that you need to for this particular slide. Then you can hit stop. And if you want to listen to it, you can go ahead and press replay. Again, here are the notes. And when it comes to the notes, these are the notes that you have attached to that slide. However, a word of caution when using these is that when you go from one slide to the next, the notes have a delay in how they appear and when they appear. So it may set there may be a lag of no speaking at the beginning of that slide deck. If you want to clear just the narrations or all of the narrations on a slide deck, you can go ahead and click here. And if you want to adjust the settings, this is where you look at which microphone is being used, or if you have a camera or multiple cameras, you can select which camera is being used. And here on the bottom, it lets you know what slide you are currently on. The first number is how long the narration is on the current slide, and this is the total time of narration on all of the slides. Here we have the tools to be able to draw on the slides in multiple colors or erase those lines, and the lines you place are in sequence of the narrations as you speak. Here you have the ability of muting the mic. You have the ability of turning on the camera, and then this would have the ability of a preview of yourself. And then you have the ability to move that camera wherever on the screen that you wish as needed. The other thing to pay attention to is that, as I mentioned, the narrations also impact the timing of the transitions. Now, you can tell what slides have the narrations by looking for the little speaker in the bottom right corner of any of the slides. There's two things to note with this. One, as I mentioned, it adjusts the transitions, but it is also treated as an animation. So this animation will start immediately at the time that the slide opens. So it's considered as a start with after previous, which is when it first opens. Now, when it comes to the transitions, if we click on this and hover over, and you see that we have the ability of playing the narrations on here or to check for the length. If we notice here that this particular narration is 8.03 seconds, and then the transition time for this slide is 8.18 seconds. So anytime you have a narration on the slide, it automatically updates when the slides advance, or you can override with the mouse click. In the case of the videos that I create, I actually go through all of the slides and remove the mouse click. So you are forced to go through the slides in sequence and cannot jump around. One last thing I wanted to cover real quick is when it comes to narrations and transitions, to be very, very careful. In short, make sure that the transitions that you do use are added after the narrations or have been added to the slides. But then try to keep the transitions as short as possible. Because one of the things that I have found is that transitions, when added, you have to pay attention to the duration of those transitions, as this will overlap the timing of the narrations. So if the narration is started very quickly, you won't hear the first few words until the transition is completed. And now for the last topic we'll discuss, it's the save as functionality and the file types. In version 2007 and beyond of Microsoft PowerPoint, they instituted the newer type, but these older ones are still common. The easy way to tell the difference between these three is that PPT files are the PowerPoint presentations. S is the PowerPoint slideshow, and this is the PowerPoint template. The big difference is that any PPT file, when the files are open, they open similar to this, where you can go ahead and edit the information and then play. If the file is a PPTS, it'll automatically play the slideshow, and usually you don't have the ability to make adjustments, but it depends on the version of the file that was saved. The template is, if you have a PowerPoint file and you open it, it'll open it similar to a PPT type, where you can go ahead and make changes, but initially you can't save over the original file, and you're forced to save it as a new file name. And then with PowerPoint 2007, they added an extra letter. The first three remain the same, but they added the X and the M primarily to differentiate between the types. These file types are better and actually compact because they utilize XML, and they also are compressed using zip. Now, the difference between the X and the M is, as we mentioned before, you may have the ability to add macros into your PowerPoint presentation, but for most users, this is not needed. If you have any programming or macros in your PowerPoint slides, you would want to have it saved as a macro-enabled file type. If you have an X, either A, there are no macros, or they are forced to be disabled when opening. It is generally safe to open up PowerPoint files with an X, because if you do not trust the macros that are inside of Microsoft Office files in general, it is possible that the programmer may have added some nefarious code that can actually do damage to your computer or essentially steal files, similar to a virus. So anytime you open a macro-enabled file, make sure you trust the person that had sent it to you. Now, there's two quick ways to save your files as a new one. So if you want to save it as a copy versus trying to just save your file, you can go head over to the file and save a copy. And here you have the option of changing where it saves. You can change the name of it. You can also change what file type, and we have many file types to choose from. We have already talked about how the macro enabled here and versus the standard, but they also allow backwards compatibility to other types. Here, you also have the capability of PDF, XPS file type, which isn't commonly used much. And then you have the MP4, WMV, these are the two that we mentioned when you're creating videos. It's best to create videos utilizing the window, because if you do it directly here, you don't have control of what size those file types are. You can also do a GIF, JPEG, PNG, and other types of image file types. These have a tendency to be problematic when there's more than one slide. So there are many options for you to choose from for saving. The other thing that you can do is you can also do Control-Shift-S to open up the Save As window. But one thing that I've also found is that F12 also works as the Save As function versus having to remember multiple keystrokes. F12 works for all Microsoft Office programs except for Outlook. So for the last exercise, expand upon the previous file that you've been working with, but do the following. Insert a slide transition throughout all of your slides. Ensure the timing is set for each slide, especially if you have narration. Animate some of the slide contents, but again, ensure that the animation fits the mode of the slide. And lastly, generate 3 different versions of this PowerPoint presentation. The first being everything that you've seen saved as a standard PowerPoint presentation file. The second file should be the same as the first, but includes the narration, but also saved as a PowerPoint show. The third file should be the previous, but saved as an MP format, but in full HD. It is not necessary to render in 4K resolution. Good luck.